Welcome to the SDG Learncast with me, Pauline Duman. In every episode, I bring insightful conversations around the subject of sustainable development and learning, helping us all to achieve a sustainable future. In this episode of the SDG Learncast, we will explore the often overlooked environmental and social impacts of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, infrastructure and expansion. Our guest is Ms. Florencia Librizzi, who is the program director at Earth Insight. In this episode, we will unpack how the global push for LNG, often viewed as a cleaner fossil fuel, threatens coastal and marine ecosystems from the Gulf of California to the Verde Island Passage and beyond. Can you introduce yourself and share your role at Earth Insight? What motivated you to focus your research on the impacts of LNG infrastructure on coastal and marine ecosystems?
Absolutely. I'm Florencia Librizzi, Program Director at Earth Insight. And in my role, I oversee strategy, governance, and program delivery. I'm also an international lawyer with experience in policy issues and multi-stakeholder engagement and education. So I also teach a course at Sustainable Development at Fordham University and have worked in the past at the UN, whether co-chairing the Higher Education for Sustainability Initiative or the Young Global Compact Principle for Responsible Management Education. So at Earth Insight, we aim to provide the public with tools and analysis that innovate understanding best practices and ambitions for protections of nature, climate, and people. So with a precautionary principle in mind, we highlight threats before they happen. And we have recently produced Nothing But Natural report on liquefied natural gas infrastructure expansion and the threats to coastal and marine ecosystems in response to raising concerns about the environmental risk of LNG and how they contribute to habitat degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change. As we see the world relying more and more on LNG expansion, we want to reveal those threats and foster greater transparency and partnerships to find solutions.
Can you provide an overview of the current global trends in LNG infrastructure development?
Global LNG infrastructure is rapidly expanding, driven by energy security concerns and the perception that LNG is a bridge fuel to renewables. LNG, which is primarily methane, is itself a potent greenhouse gas contributing to global warming. There are plans to invest over $1 trillion in new gas infrastructure, and that will increase threefold the world's export capacity and about 2/3 of the import capacity. As you can imagine, this will pose considerable environmental impacts, especially for marine ecosystems. So our report provides a heat map of how the world is expanding LNG projects across the board, as well as 5 case studies of planned development in North and South America, Africa, and Asia, which will be facing habitat destruction, pollution, and increased shipping traffic if all of these projects are developed.
You know that I am from the Philippines, and this is, of course, a very important topic also for me. Can you tell us how does LNG expansion specifically threaten marine biodiversity? Can you share specific examples from the report where LNG projects have led to significant environmental degradation?
Absolutely. And these are areas in which, in most of them, there are already LNG in place. So LNG expansion overall poses severe threats through various forms of environmental degradation, including significant habitat destruction, damage of vital coastal habitats like mangroves, wetlands, and coral reefs. And many of these ecosystems are crucial breeding grounds for marine life and provide essential services to coastal communities. Additionally, the cooling and shipping processes associated with LNG facilities introduce pollutants. We see spills often, wastewater discharge and emissions. Apart from that, increased tanker traffic leads to underwater noise pollutions, disrupting marine species like whales and dolphins and raising the risk of ship strikes. From the report on all of these areas, for instance, when it comes to Gulf South in the US, the expansion of LNG infrastructure in Texas, in Louisiana, and Mississippi threaten valuable marshlands, exacerbating air quality issues and impacting local fishing communities. And there are many species that are critically endangered already, like the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle or the Florida manatee, which are at risk. And there are many of the 20 proposed and under construction LNG facilities that are located also in communities of high poverty rates, which also experience health issues like higher risk of asthma and cancer due to pollution. Since you mentioned, and of course, the Philippines is such a, first of all, beautiful and very important biodiversity spot in the world, and also your home country, the Verde Island Passage, the LNG expansion threatens marine biodiversity. And the Verde Island Passage is an area within the Coral Triangle, which, while hosts 1% of the ocean in the world, it hosts 30% of the coral reef of the world. So it's very important for the world in terms of biodiversity. There are 9 new gas-fired power plants and 4 LNG import terminals, posing danger to species like the hawkbill turtle and oceanic manta ray. And the increased shipping traffic could lead to pollution and habitat destruction, further compromising water quality, fisheries, and local food security, especially in the wake of events like the 2023 oil spill near Mindor. So the maps locating exactly where the terminals are and the overlap in terms of the risks to biodiversity hotspots and the traffic lines or pipelines, that's something that we think where we can contribute to the world with these highly visual tools.
What is really important is what you mentioned about the places where the infrastructure are placed are also the most poor places or experiencing extreme poverty. How does LNG infrastructure and projects affect local communities, particularly the socioeconomic conditions of coastal communities?
That's a great question. So this is something that we also try to capture. The environmental harm is huge and very important. The social aspects as well, especially when oftentimes these projects are sold as a way to uplift communities, which is not always the case. So LNG infrastructure projects significantly affect local communities, particularly those in coastal areas. And there are different ways in which that happens. So displacement is one of them. Coastal communities might face displacement as large swaths of lands are used for the LNG facilities, ports, and pipelines, disrupting traditional livelihoods like fishing, farming, or tourism. We have seen in the case, for instance, of Mozambique, where there are 9 new proposed LNG terminals in East Africa, and there are some operating as well, where those projects exacerbated social tension, displacement communities, and fueling also even violence. We also see economic disruption. LNG projects can bring temporary jobs, but then often disrupt local economies by harming the fishing industry and tourism. There's also health and safety risk as communities near LNG are exposed to air and water pollution, causing respiratory problems or other health issues. And there's also risk of accidents, of leaks from LNG terminals and pipelines, which also present safety hazards. Of course, social inequality. Often the economic benefits of LNG projects do not necessarily trickle down to local communities, and instead profits are often directed to large corporations and exported, exacerbating the economic inequality in the region. We should underscore the local and cultural impact. So oftentimes when it comes to indigenous and local communities that do have a strong ties to the land and sea, and we should learn that, and we should also take much learning from them. LNG expansion can also erode cultural practices, traditions, and the way of life. So that's also very problematic, as there is really fishing and reliance on the coastal environment as integral part of their identity and the economy in different ways, which all of this will impact their cultural heritage.
A lot of people are also relying on the LNG as a source of energy. And one question is, what are the viable alternatives to LNG that can help reduce environmental and social risks? If you can expand on other alternatives that you think could address the needs that the LNG provides.
Absolutely. I'm happy to provide some thoughts here. And this is obviously not an easy answer. I think the world is trying to understand what is a sustainable and just energy transition, what are the solutions that also are appropriate for every context. But I can offer some thoughts in terms of what viable alternatives to LNG could be. And again, we highlight the threats. So we're constantly looking for partners that help bring more light to what these solutions really mean. For instance, clearly renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and other cleaner energy alternatives take a critical role in this matter. Of course, energy storage technologies that can address energy intermittency and support renewable grids. We also need to improve energy efficiency in buildings, transportations, and industries so we can reduce the overall energy demand and lessen our reliance to LNG and other fossil fuels.
And how does the LNG expansion conflict with the goals of the Paris Agreement and the global climate targets?
This is something very important, and we try to highlight it to our audience because we serve an audience like the climate and the nature, and we're trying to help reach those audiences. And it's so important that we're building a common narrative. Environmental issues relates both to climate and to the biodiversity conservation and nature agendas, and on the human aspect as well. So when it comes to LNG expansion and the way that it conflicts with the goals of the Paris Agreement and other global climate targets, this happens in many ways. Methane emissions is one of them. As I was saying, LNG is often promoted as a cleaner alternative to coal, but the process of extracting, transporting, and liquefying natural gas leads to significant methane leaks. And methane is a potent greenhouse gas, and its release undermines the efforts to limit global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, as outlined in the Paris Agreement. There's also the issue of carbon locking. Investments in LNG infrastructure can lock countries into fossil fuel dependency for decades. And that really delays the shift to renewable energy that, as we said, we really need. These facilities are long-term projects. Their operations and financial returns are tied to continue the fossil fuel consumption. And this creates what is called the carbon lock-in, where governments and corporations remain committed to fossil fuel to recoup their interest and their investments. There's also this delayed transition to renewable that I was mentioning, and oftentimes it's because of this perception of LNG seen as a bridge fuel to renewables. This narrative really slowed down the urgency of fully transition to green and clean energy sources like wind and solar, and continue to invest in LNG countries by prioritize short-term energy goals over long-term climate targets. And then there's, of course, the whole global warming potential. LNG through the entire supply chain has higher global warming potential than initially understood, which exacerbates the challenges in meeting international climate targets. So even if LNG emits less CO2 than coal, the combined greenhouse gas impact from methane leaks and makes it an unsustainable choice and not really helping us at all to meet the climate objectives of the Paris Agreement.
What policy changes are necessary to redirect investments from LNG to renewable energy? And how can governments ensure the protection of biodiversity-rich areas?
This is a key question and it's very complex, but generally, I think there is a need to redirect investment from LNG to renewable energy. And that will require several key policy changes and making sure that governments and financial institutions, that there's really a reform that is allowing and is just putting the right incentives in place for this to happen. So, for instance, incentivizing renewables, governments can offer tax breaks, subsidies, and favorable financing for renewable energy projects to make them more attractive energy investment. There's always many options when it comes to policy as an instrument for shaping the reality that should be. Stronger environmental regulations that are stricter on methane emissions and environmental assessments and biodiversity protection can limit the viability of new LNG projects. We launched a report last year, and there's a huge overlap between protected areas and oil and gas expansion, which one would not be able to believe it sometimes because these are legally protected areas, but we're not enforcing that. Another role for the government that can really enforce protection for biodiversity-rich coastal and marine regions, preventing LNG infrastructure or other type of projects in these areas that should be protected. And of course, partnerships, international cooperation, ensuring that we're aligning policies and our recommendations when it comes to global climate goals, like those set by Paris Agreement, as well to coordinate efforts to phase out LNG in favor of clean energy. And of course, I'm a fan of education, making sure that we can elevate the understanding on these issues across the board. I hope that we can continue to educate our population around the world, feels that they're global citizens, that they really understand these issues, that they care, and in whatever role they are, they can help shape our more sustainable future.
What role do you think that the local and global communities can play in halting the LNG infrastructure and promoting sustainable energy solutions?
You're right, Pauline. Everyone has a role, and local and global communities can contribute to promoting sustainable energy over LNG infrastructure. So we have the local groups that engage educating and raising awareness to protect their environments. They are the ones that know the best what's happening in the ground, and they should advise and recommend and educate and engage in a way that they can help these projects. Legal advocacy communities often collaborate with environmental organizations to challenge those projects, especially when they're breach of regulations or threaten protected areas. The public influence on policymakers, we see oftentimes, especially on the grounds, environmental advocates that they're requesting and influencing through campaigns and petitions and fossil fuel transition efforts. And they're also advising those that are in charge of policy and bringing the solutions to the people. And then collaboration with NGOs and international organizations is very important. As we always said, with the Sustainable Development Goals and these complex issues, no one can do it all. So I'll say from education to actually providing very concrete solutions, there's so much that can be done. That's where it's important to highlight that everyone has a role and that partnerships are so important to solve these very complex issues.